The hot, acrid wind blew across the barren, battle-scarred terrain of Vorta 9, carrying with it the metallic tang of recent explosions and the smoldering remnants of the last firefight. Sergeant Mara Decker tightened her grip on her rifle as she led her squad over the rough landscape, her eyes scanning every shadow and ridge for any sign of movement. This mission was supposed to be a simple patrol through the area to secure intelligence from a recently abandoned enemy relay station. But on a planet like Vorta 9, simple rarely went as planned. Mara had seen countless battlefields in her years of service, but there was something uniquely haunting about this one. The planet's sky was a dull red, cast that way by Vorta 9's twin suns, each struggling to pierce the hazy cloud of dust and ash that hung over the landscape like a shroud. Jagged outcrops of rock jutted out from the ground, making it nearly impossible to move without feeling exposed. Despite the desolation, Mara's instincts told her they weren't alone. "Stay sharp, everyone," she muttered over her comm. "We're not taking any chances here." The squad moved in a tight formation, boots crunching over the brittle alien soil that sparkled faintly, as if it held traces of crystal. They advanced slowly, scanning every rock and shadow, nerves already taut from days of relentless skirmishes with the enemy. The silence was almost oppressive, the kind that follows right after a fierce battle, heavy with tension and anticipation. Mara knew better than to trust it. They were about halfway to their target when she spotted it, something bulky and dark lying in the midst of a patch of scorched ground a few yards away. Instinctively, Mara raised her fist, signaling the squad to halt. Every weapon was raised, eyes narrowing as they followed her line of sight. "Corporal Holt, report," Mara whispered, gesturing to her scout. Corporal Holt crept forward, eyes never leaving the form ahead, while the rest of the squad held position, rifles trained. As he got closer, his posture changed from tense to cautious curiosity. "Looks like some kind of animal," he reported, his voice crackling softly over the comm. "But it's big, real big." Mara approached, keeping her rifle ready as she stepped closer to the shape on the ground. As she neared it, she saw that Holt was right. It was indeed a creature, unlike any she'd ever seen. The body was powerful and muscular, covered in a strange, smooth hide that shimmered faintly in the reddish light. Its form was canine-like, though larger and more robust, with 6 sturdy legs folded awkwardly beneath it. Mara could see patches of dried blood staining its sides and deep, jagged wounds that had clearly been inflicted by weapons far deadlier than anything her squad carried. "Is it dead?" Holt murmured, inching closer. Mara crouched down, inspecting the creature closely. Its chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, barely moving, but alive. Its eyes, large and luminous with an eerie intelligence, flickered open, locking onto Mara with an intensity that surprised her. There was no threat in those eyes, only pain, weariness, and something else, something that looked alarmingly like trust. "Careful, Sergeant," another squad member muttered, his rifle still trained on the creature. "We don't know what it's capable of." Mara ignored him, her focus on the creature's injuries. The wounds were severe, and from the burn marks and deep lacerations, she could tell they weren't caused by a mere animal attack. This creature had been through a battle, just like them. The scars along its flank were unlike anything she'd ever seen, almost ceremonial, as if it bore symbols or markings from its kind. "Sergeant Decker, we've got orders to secure that relay," Sergeant Willis reminded her, shifting uncomfortably. "We can't risk taking time on some alien animal." Mara glanced up, weighing her options. The relay was their objective, but she couldn't bring herself to leave this creature here to die. She couldn't explain it, but something about the creature's gaze held her, a strange feeling she hadn't felt since she first joined the service. "Leave it behind," another soldier insisted. "Could be a trap, or worse." "We're not leaving it to die," Mara said firmly, meeting each of her squad mates' gazes. "We have a duty. Not just to follow orders, but to protect life where we can. This creature isn't a threat. Look at it. There's no malice here, only pain." There was a tense silence as the squad exchanged glances. She knew some of them thought she was crazy for even suggesting it, but she also knew her team trusted her. Slowly, with visible reluctance, they lowered their weapons. Mara removed a coagulant foam from her medkit and began to treat the creature's worst wounds, pressing the foam into the deep gashes. Its eyes tracked her movements, and she could sense the faintest easing in its breathing as she worked, as if it understood that she was helping. "What are you calling it?" Holt asked with a faint smirk, watching her tend to the alien. "Valor," Mara replied without hesitation. "Look at him. He's a fighter." Holt chuckled, shaking his head. "Valor it is, then. Let's hope he's worth the trouble." They fashioned a makeshift stretcher out of nearby debris, carefully lifting Valor onto it. As they resumed their trek toward the relay, Mara felt a strange sense of responsibility, a weight that went beyond the mission. This wasn't just about their orders anymore, it was about something bigger, something that Valor seemed to represent. The squad moved forward, Valor in tow, casting uneasy glances at the creature as they advanced. But despite his injuries, he remained calm, eyes closed, as though trusting them completely with his life. Mara couldn't shake the feeling that his trust was more than simple gratitude, that he knew something, that maybe he was aware of what lay ahead. The relay station loomed in the distance, and Mara adjusted her grip on her rifle. She was aware of the murmured complaints, the low grumbles about babysitting an alien animal, but as she glanced at Valor's silent form, she knew that they were walking into something bigger than they'd signed up for. She didn't know what awaited them at the relay or what Valor's presence meant, but Mara was certain of one thing: leaving him behind hadn't been an option. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a journey into the unknown, with a creature who might just change everything. The squad's path through the rugged terrain of Vorta 9 grew more challenging. As they moved closer to the relay station, Mara stayed near Valor, her gaze alternating between the horizon and the creature they'd brought with them. The injured alien dog was silent, eyes half-lidded, but Mara could sense that he was aware of his surroundings. Every so often he would let out a low, almost inaudible whine, his gaze flicking toward Mara, as if reassuring himself that she was still there. As they pressed forward, Corporal Holt sidled up beside her. "You know, Sergeant, we might not get out of this one if we're slowed down by our friend here." Mara met his gaze, reading the doubt in his eyes. She knew the risks. Taking an injured alien along on a mission that was already dangerous seemed reckless, but something in her wouldn't let her leave Valor behind, and the look in his eyes only strengthened her resolve. "We're not leaving him," she said firmly. "We made it this far, and I intend to see him safely through to the end." Holt grunted but didn't argue further, sensing the finality in her tone. Despite his grumbling, she could tell he respected her decision, even if he didn't fully understand it. As they navigated a steep incline, Mara noticed Valor struggling, his breath growing labored. She crouched beside him, assessing his condition, and offered him water from her canteen. To her surprise, he accepted, drinking with a gentleness that caught her off guard. Despite his fierce appearance, Valor was surprisingly calm and receptive, his massive form hiding a softer spirit. His eyes locked onto hers again, and Mara felt a connection that was deeper than she'd expected. It was as though he understood her intentions, his loyalty already forming. A loud crackle came over the comms, jolting her out of the moment. "Sergeant Decker, we're nearing the relay," Sergeant Willis reported. "Scanners are picking up faint energy signatures nearby. Could be enemy patrols." Mara glanced at her squad, noting the tension that had crept into each of their expressions. This mission had taken an unexpected turn the moment they'd encountered Valor, but their objective remained the same: secure the relay and retrieve the intel. She nodded, acknowledging the report. "All right, keep moving, but stay alert," she ordered, eyes sharp. As they resumed their march, Valor seemed to sense the shift in the squad's focus. His ears pricked up, his head lifted a little higher, and despite his injuries, there was a new alertness in his posture. Mara couldn't help but marvel at his resilience. Just as they reached the crest of a rocky outcrop, the relay station came into view. A squat, bunker-like structure nestled in the valley below, but something was wrong. Smoke billowed from one side of the building, and charred bodies, enemy soldiers, littered the ground. "Looks like someone's already paid this place a visit," Holt muttered, scanning the scene with a mix of caution and curiosity. Mara motioned for the squad to fan out and approach the station from different angles, keeping their weapons raised and alert. They advanced quietly, each step bringing them closer to the source of the destruction. As they drew nearer, a low growl rumbled from Valor's throat. Mara felt the muscles in his body tense, and she knew without looking that his instincts were kicking in. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway, staggering out of the shadows. It was an enemy soldier, barely able to stand, his armor cracked and smoldering from recent combat. His eyes widened as he spotted the squad, and his hand moved toward his weapon. But before he could react, Valor leaped forward, letting out a deep, guttural snarl. In a blur of movement, Valor pinned the soldier to the ground, his teeth bared in a display of raw power. Mara and her squad froze, taken aback by the ferocity in Valor's attack. He held the enemy down with a force that belied his injuries, his growl echoing through the valley. "Hold!" Mara commanded, stepping forward cautiously. "Valor, let him go." To her surprise, Valor obeyed, releasing the soldier but keeping a wary eye on him. Mara knelt beside the fallen man, checking for weapons before she addressed him. "What happened here?" she demanded, her voice low and unyielding. The soldier coughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth as he struggled to speak. "The relay was attacked by creatures like that one." His gaze flickered to Valor, fear evident in his eyes. Mara exchanged a glance with her squad, confusion and realization dawning simultaneously. Creatures like Valor had attacked this outpost, yet this one had fought alongside them. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were part of something bigger, something she didn't fully understand yet. "Secure the area," she ordered, watching as the soldier's eyes dulled, his breathing slowing. It was clear he wouldn't make it, but his words lingered, sparking questions that Mara couldn't yet answer. As the squad swept the relay station, Mara stayed by Valor's side, her thoughts racing. This creature wasn't just an animal, he was something more, a being with intelligence and loyalty. But there was something deeper, something that hinted at a connection between Valor and the conflict they found themselves in. Her calm crackled to life, snapping her back to the present. "Sergeant Decker, we've secured the perimeter. The relay is intact, but it's seen better days." Mara nodded, refocusing on the mission. "All right, let's get what we came for." Inside the relay station, they found the control room partially destroyed, with shattered monitors and burnt wiring strewn across the floor. Corporal Holt worked quickly, connecting his tablet to what remained of the system to download any salvageable data. As he worked, Mara stood guard with Valor beside her. The creature's eyes seemed to track every sound, every flicker of movement, his instincts sharp despite his injuries. Mara had seen many soldiers with a fraction of his endurance and discipline. Holt's voice broke the silence. "Got it, Sergeant. Data's downloading now, but it'll take a few minutes." They waited, the quiet punctuated only by the faint hum of electronics. Mara felt her attention drawn back to Valor, whose gaze was fixed on her as if awaiting her command. She knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder, feeling the heat radiate from his wounds. "You're tougher than most, Valor," she murmured. "I don't know what they did to you, but I promise you're safe with us." Valor's eyes softened, his massive form leaning slightly into her touch. In that moment, Mara realized that her promise was more than words. She had taken responsibility for this creature's life, and no matter what lay ahead, she was committed to seeing him through it. Just then, an alert beeped from Holt's tablet. The data was secure. Mara stood, her resolve hardening as she looked at her squad. "We've got what we need. Let's move out." As they exited the relay station, Mara cast one last glance at the burning remains and the fallen enemies around them. The mission had taken a turn she couldn't have predicted, but she knew that this was only the beginning. With Valor by her side, she felt the weight of something far greater than herself. They moved as a unit, Valor keeping pace with surprising strength, his eyes sharp and focused. Whatever his past had been, Mara knew that their fates were now intertwined. The squad moved steadily away from the relay station, trekking through the uneven terrain as the red sky above began to dim. Mara kept a close eye on Valor, who seemed to be gaining strength despite his injuries. His steps were more assured, and his alert gaze swept the surroundings with a calculated intensity, like he was assessing every rock and shadow for potential threats. Corporal Holt fell into step beside Mara, his eyes narrowed as he glanced at Valor. "I'll give it to him. He's tough. But are you sure about keeping him with us? He could attract more of those things." Mara shot him a look, understanding his concern. It was true that they still didn't fully know what they were dealing with, but something in her gut told her that Valor was an ally. He had proven his loyalty back at the relay station, and she wasn't about to question that bond now. "We're not abandoning him," she said firmly. "We all saw what he did back there. Valor's one of us now." Holt opened his mouth to argue but stopped as a sudden static crackled through their comms. Mara's hand shot to her earpiece, straining to make out the faint voice that came through the interference. "Sergeant Decker, be advised. Enemy patrols reported in your vicinity. Possible reinforcements heading your way. Maintain a low profile." Mara's grip on her rifle tightened. She scanned the rugged landscape, her instincts screaming at her that they were being watched. Valor let out a low growl, his body stiffening, confirming her suspicions. "Everyone down!" Mara hissed, dropping to the ground and motioning for the squad to follow. They crouched behind a line of boulders, watching as shapes moved on the horizon, silhouetted against the fading light. A squad of enemy patrol drones appeared first, their lights casting eerie red glows over the ground. They hovered in precise formation, scanning the area with cold efficiency. Behind them came a line of armored infantry, alien soldiers with heavy blasters, and a look of grim determination in their every movement. Mara glanced at Valor, who was tense and poised, his gaze fixed on the approaching enemy. She could see the calculation in his eyes, an intelligence that told her he understood the danger just as well as they did. It was as if he could sense the tension in the air, the anticipation of what was coming. "What's the plan, Sergeant?" whispered Holt, his fingers drumming nervously on his rifle. Mara assessed their options, which were grim. Engaging a patrol this size would be a nightmare, but trying to sneak past was just as risky with those drones overhead. "Hold your fire until I give the signal," she whispered back, her mind racing. "We'll use the rocks for cover and pick them off as quietly as possible." As the enemy drew closer, Mara gave a slight nod to Valor, who responded with a barely audible growl. He seemed to understand what she needed from him, and she realized she was relying on his instincts as much as her own. Together, they would stand or fall. The first drone passed within striking distance, and Mara signaled for Holt to take the shot. His silenced rifle spat a quick, deadly flash, and the drone dropped from the sky in a shower of sparks. The alien soldiers noticed immediately, shouting in their harsh language as they scattered for cover. "Move!" Mara commanded, and the squad shifted positions, darting between rocks and firing controlled bursts at the enemy. The air filled with the hiss of energy blasts and the roar of rifle fire as the ambush erupted in full force. Valor lunged forward, his powerful form weaving through the chaos with surprising agility. He was like a shadow, darting between enemies, his sharp teeth and claws ripping through their armor with a force that left Mara in awe. He was no mere animal. He was a warrior, fierce and unyielding. One of the enemy soldiers spotted Mara and aimed a blaster at her, but before he could fire, Valor was upon him, tackling him to the ground with a growl that echoed through the valley. Mara's heart pounded as she watched, both exhilarated and wary. Valor was fighting alongside them, but there was a primal intensity in him that reminded her just how dangerous he truly was. The firefight intensified as the remaining enemies regrouped, firing in all directions. Mara took cover behind a rock, her breath coming fast, the sting of dust and heat thick in the air. She caught sight of Holt to her left, keeping the drones at bay with precise shots, while the rest of her squad held their positions, determined not to lose ground. Then, as quickly as it had started, the sounds of gunfire faded. The last of the enemy soldiers fell to the ground, and the valley grew silent once more. Mara rose cautiously, her weapon still raised as she scanned the area for any signs of movement. Valor stood beside her, his flanks heaving from exertion, but his gaze was steady and sharp. The squad regrouped, and Mara took a moment to catch her breath, feeling the adrenaline ebb. She looked at Valor, who returned her gaze with a quiet intensity. Blood stained his fur, but he held his head high, his posture proud and unwavering. Corporal Holt approached, glancing at Valor with a newfound respect. "He's got a bite on him, that's for sure. I didn't expect him to be such a valuable asset." Mara gave a slight nod, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Valor's proven himself more than once. I think we're lucky to have him." They continued onward, moving cautiously through the rugged landscape. The ambush had cost them precious time, but Mara knew they couldn't afford to stop now. The intel they'd retrieved from the relay station was too important, and the enemy patrol was a stark reminder of the dangers that awaited them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the landscape, Mara felt a sense of resolve settle over her. Valor had fought by their side, risking his life for them without hesitation. Whatever his story was, he was no ordinary creature, and she was beginning to suspect that their paths had crossed for a reason. Suddenly, a faint beeping sounded from Holt's gear. He tapped at his tablet, frowning as he examined the data. "Sergeant, I'm picking up more activity ahead. Looks like a checkpoint. Heavily guarded," he reported, glancing up with concern. Mara considered their options, realizing that they'd have to rely on every resource they had, including Valor, to get past this next hurdle. She crouched down beside him, running her hand gently along his fur as she met his gaze. "We're going to need you again, Valor," she murmured, almost as if speaking to a fellow soldier. "Stay with us, all right?" Valor's intense eyes held hers, and in that moment, she knew she could trust him as much as any member of her squad. With a final nod, she rose to her feet, signaling her squad to prepare. "Let's move," Mara commanded, her voice steady with determination. She led her squad forward, Valor walking in step beside her, their bond growing with each step into the unknown. This battle was far from over, but together, They were ready for whatever lay ahead. As Mara and her squad continued their trek through the barren landscape of Vorta 9, the atmosphere grew tense and quiet. They were deep behind enemy lines, with only a vague map of checkpoints and outposts to guide them toward the extraction point. Every step brought new challenges, and every glance over the jagged horizon reminded Mara just how vulnerable they were in hostile territory. Yet, through it all, Valor stayed close by, matching their pace despite his earlier injuries. He moved silently, his keen gaze scanning the landscape as if he understood the risks as well as they did. Mara couldn't shake the sense that Valor was more than just an ordinary animal. He was intelligent, focused, and seemed to carry an innate understanding of their mission, almost as if he had done this before. "Sergeant, I think we're coming up on an enemy supply base," Corporal Holt muttered, checking his handheld scanner. "Could be a good chance to gather supplies, maybe find more intel if we're lucky." Mara nodded, considering the risks. "Agreed, we'll take a look, but keep it quiet. We're not here to start another firefight." They moved forward, slipping into the cover of a craggy ridge that overlooked a small encampment below. Alien soldiers moved about in disciplined formations, unloading crates from transport vehicles. The soldiers' armor gleamed under the dull light of the planet's twin suns, each step they took reverberating in the still air. As the squad settled into position to observe, Mara's gaze drifted to Valor. The creature's body was taut, his muscles coiled as he watched the enemy movements with a strange intensity. His behavior was too deliberate, too strategic for any mere animal. There was a history here, a knowledge that went beyond instinct. "Sergeant, do you see those symbols?" whispered Private Ortiz, gesturing at the alien soldier's armor. "Same as the markings on Valor's flank." Mara studied the symbols, intricate and sharp, etched into the alien armor with reverence. The same patterns traced along Valor's body, faded and scarred but unmistakably similar. A knot of realization tightened in her chest. Valor wasn't just some stray creature caught in the crossfire. He was part of something larger, something sacred to these people. Without hesitation, she tapped her comm and motioned to her squad to hold position. Her mind raced, putting together the fragments of information she'd collected so far. The strange symbols, the enemy soldiers' comment at the relay station, Valor's uncanny intelligence. Just then, Corporal Holt's voice broke her concentration. Sergeant, I think you'll want to see this." Holt handed her his tablet, where he'd accessed a few files from a nearby enemy relay signal. One document stood out, a series of schematics, annotated in alien script, labeled Project Guardian. "Project Guardian?" Mara murmured, scrolling through the information. The files detailed an initiative where Valor's kind, identified as Guardians, were once protectors of sacred places. They were bred and trained to shield certain locations or artifacts, revered by the alien culture for their unique abilities. But the files took a darker turn, describing how the Guardians had been repurposed, turned into weapons, their loyalty exploited for war. Mara's heart sank as she pieced it all together. Valor wasn't just a casualty of war, he was a soldier, forced to fight against his own kind's noble purpose. She looked down at him, her resolve hardening. He'd likely seen comrades fall, his purpose twisted into something he never chose. "We're not leaving him," she whispered fiercely. "We're taking him out of here. No way we're letting him fall back into their hands." The squad exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Even the most skeptical among them seemed moved by the revelation. Valor wasn't just an asset, he was a victim of the same conflict they fought in, only on a deeper, more tragic scale. Mara's comm crackled to life and Sergeant Willis's voice came through. "Decker, we've got company. Incoming enemy patrol, moving fast." They had no time to lose. Mara signaled for her squad to spread out, ready to defend their position. She crouched beside Valor, whispering, "We're going to get you through this. I promise." Valor's amber eyes met hers, his gaze calm and steady, as if he understood every word. He turned his head, listening to the approaching patrol, his muscles tensing once again. In that moment, Mara knew she could rely on him as much as any member of her squad. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. The enemy patrol had spotted them, and the ensuing gunfire echoed through the valley as the squad took cover and returned fire. Blaster bolts and rifle rounds zipped through the air, leaving trails of smoke in their wake. Valor leaped into action with a swiftness that defied his earlier injuries, weaving through the squad with the precision of a seasoned warrior. He lunged at one of the enemy soldiers, his claws sinking into armor, tearing through it like it was nothing. His movements were efficient and fierce, a testament to his training and instincts honed by years of battle. Mara fired at an enemy soldier to her left, dropping him before he could get a shot off. She stole a glance at Valor, watching him fight alongside them, feeling a surge of pride and determination. They were not leaving him behind, not after everything he'd been through, not after discovering what he truly was. Mara studied the symbols, intricate and sharp, etched into the alien armor with reverence. The same patterns traced along Valor's body, faded and scarred but unmistakably similar. A knot of realization tightened in her chest. Valor wasn't just some stray creature caught in the crossfire. He was part of something larger, something sacred to these people. Without hesitation, she tapped her comm and motioned to her squad to hold position. Her mind raced, putting together the fragments of information she'd collected so far. The strange symbols, the enemy soldiers' comment at the relay station, Valor's uncanny intelligence. Just then, Corporal Holt's voice broke her concentration. Sergeant, I think you'll want to see this." Holt handed her his tablet, where he'd accessed a few files from a nearby enemy relay signal. One document stood out, a series of schematics, annotated in alien script, labeled Project Guardian. Project Guardian? Mara murmured, scrolling through the information. The files detailed an initiative where Valor's kind, identified as Guardians, were once protectors of sacred places. They were bred and trained to shield certain locations or artifacts, revered by the alien culture for their unique abilities. But the files took a darker turn, describing how the Guardians had been repurposed, turned into weapons, their loyalty exploited for war. Mara's heart sank as she pieced it all together. Valor wasn't just a casualty of war, he was a soldier, forced to fight against his own kind's noble purpose. She looked down at him, her resolve hardening. He'd likely seen comrades fall, his purpose twisted into something he never chose. "We're not leaving him," she whispered fiercely. "We're taking him out of here. No way we're letting him fall back into their hands." The squad exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Even the most skeptical among them seemed moved by the revelation. Valor wasn't just an asset, he was a victim of the same conflict they fought in, only on a deeper, more tragic scale. Mara's comm crackled to life and Sergeant Willis's voice came through. "Decker, we've got company. Incoming enemy patrol, moving fast." They had no time to lose. Mara signaled for her squad to spread out, ready to defend their position. She crouched beside Valor, whispering, "We're going to get you through this. I promise." Valor's amber eyes met hers, his gaze calm and steady, as if he understood every word. He turned his head, listening to the approaching patrol, his muscles tensing once again. In that moment, Mara knew she could rely on him as much as any member of her squad. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. The enemy patrol had spotted them, and the ensuing gunfire echoed through the valley as the squad took cover and returned fire. Blaster bolts and rifle rounds zipped through the air, leaving trails of smoke in their wake. Valor leaped into action with a swiftness that defied his earlier injuries, weaving through the squad with the precision of a seasoned warrior. He lunged at one of the enemy soldiers, his claws sinking into armor, tearing through it like it was nothing. His movements were efficient and fierce, a testament to his training and instincts honed by years of battle. Mara fired at an enemy soldier to her left, dropping him before he could get a shot off. She stole a glance at Valor, watching him fight alongside them, feeling a surge of pride and determination. They were not leaving him behind, not after everything he'd been through, not after discovering what he truly was. The firefight was brutal, but Mara's squad held their ground. They picked off the soldiers one by one, Valor's attacks keeping the enemy distracted and off balance. In a matter of minutes, the area was silent once more, the enemy squad lying defeated on the ground. Mara took a moment to catch her breath, her gaze falling on Valor. He was bleeding from a fresh wound on his shoulder, but he stood tall, his eyes steady as he surveyed the battlefield. There was a nobility in him, a quiet resilience that Mara had come to admire deeply. As the squad regrouped, Mara examined the captured files on her tablet once more, trying to make sense of the Project Guardian entries. Valor's species had been revered, their abilities cherished, but someone had twisted that reverence into exploitation, forcing them to abandon their true purpose and become weapons in a war they likely had no stake in. "Sergeant, we need to get moving," Holt said, bringing her back to the present. "If there's a Guardian research facility nearby, we might be able to find more intel, or even free others like Valor." Mara looked at her squad, seeing the determination in their faces. They all understood that this mission was now more than just survival. It was about redemption, and maybe even righting a terrible wrong. "All right," she agreed. We push forward. Keep your weapons ready and stay close. We're going to find out everything we can about this project. She knelt beside Valor, her hand resting on his back. You're not just a weapon, she whispered, her voice fierce. You're one of us now. Valor's gaze softened, and he pressed his head against her hand, his silent acknowledgement of their bond. As they moved forward, Mara felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that they weren't just fighting to escape. They were fighting to give Valor and others like him the chance to reclaim their purpose, to restore the honor that had been stripped from them. And with each step, Mara knew that this journey would change them all. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were allies in a battle far more significant than any one conflict, marching together into the unknown, bound by loyalty and something deeper, something unbreakable. Mara and her squad pressed on through the harsh landscape, the weight of their mission heavier than ever. Valor moved beside her, his silent strength a constant reminder of what was at stake. As they neared the extraction zone, Mara's thoughts churned over what they had learned about the Guardians. The images of the files they'd found lingered in her mind. Proud creatures, once revered, now forced to fight in a war they hadn't chosen. But before Mara could dwell further, her calm crackled to life. Sergeant Decker, heads up. Sergeant Willis's voice came through, tense. We're picking up movement. Scanners show an enemy battalion closing in fast, likely reinforcements. Mara's heart sank. She had known this mission would be dangerous, but the approaching battalion meant a final confrontation was inevitable. Glancing at Valor, she saw him stiffen, his ears twitching as he too sensed the incoming danger. Everyone, listen up, Mara said, her voice carrying the weight of a leader bracing for a fight. We've got one chance to make it to extraction, and it looks like it won't be easy. We hold the line here until we get a signal from the evac team. We're not leaving without Valor. The squad exchanged grim nods, each one understanding that the battle ahead would likely be their last if they weren't careful. They quickly set up a defensive position, using the rocks and cliffs to create as much cover as possible. Mara crouched beside Valor, checking his wounds from their last fight. He was bruised and bloodied, but his eyes remained sharp and focused, filled with an unwavering determination. As the first enemies came into view, Mara felt a surge of adrenaline. The alien soldiers advanced in formation, their armor gleaming, weapons raised. Blaster fire erupted, filling the air with the acrid scent of scorched earth and heated metal. The squad fired back in controlled bursts, each shot precise, every move calculated to hold their ground. Valor leaped into action, darting forward with a ferocity that surprised even Mara. Despite his injuries, he moved with fluid, practiced precision, engaging enemy soldiers in close combat. His powerful claws tore through armor, and his snarls echoed across the battlefield, instilling fear in the enemy ranks. One enemy soldier aimed a blaster at Mara, but Valor was faster, lunging to intercept. He knocked the soldier to the ground, his growl low and menacing. Mara took advantage of the distraction, firing at another enemy, her aim deadly and unerring. Together they fought in tandem, each one covering the other's weaknesses. As the firefight raged on, Mara heard a familiar voice over the comm. This is Evac Team Alpha. We're en route, but we'll need a secure landing zone. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes. They just had to hold out for 10 minutes, though every second felt like an eternity. Mara's mind raced, calculating their odds. It was going to take everything they had to hold the line. Valor, Mara called, signaling to him. He turned to her, blood matting his fur but his eyes as bright and fierce as ever. She could see the toll the battle was taking on him, but he showed no sign of slowing down. Just then, a squad of heavily armored enemy reinforcements pushed through, carrying larger, more lethal weapons. One of them fired a high-powered pulse that hit a nearby boulder, blasting it apart and sending shards of rock flying. Mara shielded her face as debris rained down around them, her ears ringing from the impact. She checked her squad, ensuring they were still standing, but the blast had left several disoriented. Private Ortiz staggered to his feet, his helmet dented, but he managed a quick nod in her direction. Hold the line, Mara shouted, rallying her team. We're almost there. Valor positioned himself in front of her, his stance protective. Mara noticed a change in his behavior, a steely resolve that hinted at his understanding of the gravity of the situation. It was almost as if he knew this was the fight of his life, a chance to reclaim the honor of his kind, to prove that he was more than a weapon. The battle intensified as more enemy soldiers poured in. Mara felt the sting of exhaustion creeping in, but she forced it back, knowing that surrender wasn't an option. Her squad fought valiantly, each member holding their position, despite the overwhelming numbers. But the enemy was relentless, and soon enough they managed to push closer. A blaster bolt seared past Mara's arm, scorching the edge of her armor. She grit her teeth against the pain, her eyes darting to her squad as they struggled to fend off the advancing forces. In that moment, Valor did something Mara hadn't anticipated. He threw back his head and let out a deep, resonant howl, a sound so fierce and raw, it cut through the noise of battle like a blade. And then, from deep within him, he unleashed a powerful shockwave that rippled through the battlefield, sending enemy soldiers sprawling as their equipment sparked and malfunctioned. The shockwave knocked Mara and her squad back as well, though Valor had somehow managed to direct the blast away from them. When the dust settled, Mara looked around in amazement. The enemy was disoriented, their weapons temporarily disabled, giving the squad a precious moment to regroup. "Sergeant," Holt whispered, awe in his voice. Did Valor just save us?" Mara nodded, her gaze never leaving Valor. "Yes, he did, and he's not done yet." Taking advantage of the chaos, she rallied her squad, pressing forward with renewed determination. Together, they fought with everything they had, pushing back the remaining forces as the minutes ticked down. Finally, a shadow passed overhead as the evac ship descended, its engines roaring. The ramp lowered and Mara motioned to her team, urging them toward the exit point. "Move, everyone! That's our ride!" The squad scrambled toward the evac ship, covering each other as they went. Mara stayed close to Valor, ensuring he made it to safety. As they neared the ramp, an enemy soldier lunged out from behind cover, aiming his weapon directly at her. But before he could fire, Valor leaped forward, knocking the weapon from the soldier's hands. Mara finished the job with a swift shot, her breath catching as she realized how close it had been. "Thank you, Valor," she whispered, her voice tight with gratitude. They reached the evac ship, climbing aboard just as the enemy forces began to regroup. The ramp closed, and Mara's heart raced as the ship lifted off, the battlefield receding below them. As the adrenaline ebbed, exhaustion took its place. Mara slumped against the wall, catching her breath as she looked at her squad, bruised but alive. She turned to Valor, who lay down beside her, his eyes half closed, though there was a sense of peace in his gaze. "You saved us," she murmured, reaching out to rest a hand on his head. "And not just today, you gave us hope." Valor's gaze softened, and in that quiet moment, Mara knew that their bond was unbreakable. He wasn't just a creature they'd rescued. He was a comrade, a guardian who had proven his worth 100 times over. As the ship carried them away from the ravaged landscape of Vorta 9, Mara felt a surge of hope. They had all survived against impossible odds, and together, they would face whatever lay ahead. As the evac ship soared through the atmosphere, the tension on board gradually dissolved into a profound silence. Mara's squad was exhausted, but there was a collective feeling of accomplishment that permeated the cabin. Each one of them had fought with everything they had, but Mara's gaze kept drifting to Valor, who lay by her side, his massive form rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. His once bright fur was matted with dust and dried blood, but his eyes, when they opened to meet hers, still held that unmistakable spark of loyalty and strength. The ship's captain announced their ETA to the outpost, jolting Mara out of her thoughts. "We'll be landing in 10 minutes, Sergeant. Command has already been alerted. They want a full debrief as soon as you touch down." Mara nodded, then glanced at her squad. She could see that each of them was wrestling with their own thoughts, the events of the last few days weighing on their minds. Private Ortiz, usually so light-hearted, was staring into the middle distance, and Corporal Holt, who had initially been skeptical of Valor, now looked at the creature with something close to reverence. Mara let out a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they'd been through. "Listen up, everyone," she said quietly, her voice carrying through the cabin. "What we've accomplished isn't just another mission. We've seen the truth behind what these creatures were meant to be, and what they've been forced to become. Valor isn't just some asset. He's proof that loyalty and honor exist across any boundary, any species." Her words resonated in the quiet of the ship, and her squad nodded, each of them visibly moved. As they neared the outpost, Mara felt a pang of concern for Valor. He had fought beside them, risked his life without hesitation, and in many ways, he had become more than just a comrade. He had become a symbol of resilience, a bridge between their world and his. When the evac ship landed, medics were waiting, along with command officials, who looked from Mara to her squad, assessing their condition. She could see the curiosity in their eyes when they looked at Valor, a creature both fearsome and gentle, his presence commanding respect. One of the medics, a young woman with a kind face, approached cautiously. "Sergeant Decker, we need to take a look at your companion. He's been through quite an ordeal." Mara nodded, her protective instinct kicking in. Treat him with care. He's more than just an asset. He's family. The medic smiled, understanding the connection. We'll make sure he's looked after. Mara and her squad were led to the debriefing room, where command awaited them. She relayed the events of their mission, the ambushes, the relay station, and most importantly, what they had uncovered about Project Guardian. She spoke with conviction, detailing how Valor and others of his kind had once been revered protectors, only to be manipulated into weapons of war. Her words seemed to stir something in the room. The command officials listened intently, and Mara could see them absorbing the weight of her revelations. When she finished, there was a heavy silence, and one of the senior officers, General Cartwright, spoke up. "What you've described, Sergeant, is extraordinary," he said, his tone a mixture of respect and disbelief. "If what you say is true, then Valor, and others like him, are not just weapons. They are allies, deserving of the same respect and honor we grant our own soldiers." Mara nodded, relieved that her message had reached them. "Exactly, sir. Valor has proven himself in ways no ordinary creature could. He's fought beside us, protected us. He's a hero." The general exchanged glances with the other officers, and Mara could tell they were weighing her words. Finally, he cleared his throat, his gaze softening. "Sergeant Decker, I want to commend you and your squad. You've not only completed your mission but uncovered something far greater. From this day forward, Valor will be recognized for his bravery and his service. We will initiate discussions to secure the rights and protection of his kind. This won't be the last we see of these guardians." A wave of relief washed over Mara, and she allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, sir. That's all I could ask for." After the debrief, Mara made her way to the infirmary, where Valor was being treated. The sight of him surrounded by medics, his massive form lying peacefully as they tended to his wounds, filled her with gratitude. She approached, and his eyes opened, meeting hers with a quiet, steady gaze. "Hey, Valor," she murmured, crouching beside him. "Looks like we made it. They're going to see to it that you and others like you are protected from now on. You did it. You changed everything." Valor's eyes softened, and he let out a low, contented rumble, leaning his head toward her. Mara placed her hand gently on his head, feeling the warmth and strength beneath her fingers. It was a moment of silent understanding, a bond forged through fire and loyalty. The days that followed were filled with discussions and preparations. Command worked to draft new protocols for any encounters with Guardians, emphasizing respect and mutual understanding. News spread across the ranks of Valor's bravery, and he became something of a legend, a story of resilience, loyalty, and the power of an unbreakable bond. As Valor recovered, Mara spent every spare moment by his side, their connection deepening with each quiet moment together. He would nudge her hand with his nose, a gesture of trust and affection, and she would smile, feeling honored to have earned his loyalty. Finally, the day came when Valor was strong enough to leave the infirmary. Command had arranged for him to be transported to a sanctuary they had established, a place where he and other Guardians could live in peace, away from the conflicts that had once consumed their lives. Mara walked with Valor to the transport, her hand resting on his back. She felt a lump rise in her throat, the realization sinking in that this might be their final goodbye. Valor seemed to sense it too, his gaze lingering on her, filled with a depth of emotion that needed no words. "Thank you, Valor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything, for fighting beside us, for trusting me." Valor leaned his head against her shoulder, his warmth grounding her. In that moment, Mara knew that their bond would endure, no matter the distance. He wasn't just a creature she'd met in the chaos of war. He was a friend, a warrior, and a hero. As he boarded the transport, Mara raised a hand in farewell, her heart both heavy and hopeful. She knew that the work they had done together would ripple outward, changing the way people saw Valor's kind, forging a legacy that would outlast any conflict. Watching the transport take off, Mara felt a strange sense of peace. Valor's journey was far from over, and neither was hers. She turned back toward the base, a renewed sense of purpose filling her. There would be new missions, new battles, but she would carry Valor's legacy with her, a reminder of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that transcend any divide. In the vastness of the universe, amid all the battles and the unknown, she knew one thing for certain: they had made a difference, and that was a victory she would carry with her always.